Welcome to DeVito Dreammakers monthly market post. I'm Amanda DeVito, your host, and I am coming to you monthly. This is going to be a new segment that we do where we will bring statistics from the Denver real estate market directly to you. So there are 4 pieces of information that dictate the health of the real estate market. The first of which is residential inventory. So how many for sale signs are in front yards? The second piece of market information that we follow carefully is days on market or days in market. Depends on who you ask, but the days on market is exactly that. How long is it taking from the time the listing goes active in the MLS to the time that it goes pending or under contract? The third piece of market data that we're going to analyze is number of sales. So how many closings are we having each month? So you have active listings, days on market, number of closings, and then the final piece of data that we look at is your average price. So average price is at what price are we selling? The way we break the stats down is into 2 categories. So in Denver real estate, in residential real estate, we look at single family detached homes as one category. And then as another category, we look at what we call condos, townhouse, or attached, anything that is attached to the property. So this would be condos, townhouses, and sort of anything that shares maybe a party wall. There is an entire segment of the market called multifamily. We are not going to be looking at the multifamily market specifically. That would be duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and bigger. Anything that gets bigger than that really dips into the commercial real estate space. So for the sake of this analysis and for this conversation, we're going to be looking at residential real estate in the greater Denver area. To further source down where we come up with our data, we use the Denver area multiple listing service. That provider here is called RE Colorado, and they do a compilation of data for us out of a program called InfoSparks. So InfoSparks is actually where we're aggregating the data from. And in this particular data set, we are using the greater Denver area, including what turns out to be a 17 county region. There are sort of 8 counties that make up sort of the very tight Denver market. This would include all of the ancillary counties that are on the outside. Those counties include Boulder, Denver, Broomfield, Adams, Arapahoe, Jefferson, Douglas, Larimer, Weld, Morgan, Elbert, Teller, Park, Lake, Summit, Clear Creek, and Gilpin. So any of those counties that fall into the RE Colorado data, they're being included or being caught up in this data set. Okay, so as a summary, we've got monthly data that will come to you from sourced RE Colorado, analyzed by me, your host, Amanda DiVito Parle. So stick with me here. And for those of you who are data analysts, you're going to like this. For those of you who get a little squirrely when it comes to analyzing data, maybe you can check in with us from time to time, but we're going to dig in here now. So what I like to talk about in terms of residential data is just that the residential single family market tends to lead. The condo attached market tends to follow. So single family homes really are the heartbeat of the market. The condo and townhouse tends to be either your entry level buyers, sometimes investors own condos and townhouses, and they become sort of a secondary market to the single family. So they tend to follow or rise tides together. And so often when you're looking at the stats, you will see that. People often ask me, how's the market doing? And so the answer is, it's always a good time in real estate. And I jokingly say that because, knowing the market data in the moment is only worth anything if you're actually following it with regularity. So let's look at where residential inventory is at today. And bear with me here, this is a year-over-year statistic. And so month over month isn't worth anything. If I looked at what happened in April and what happened in May, that doesn't really tell me anything. What I'm curious about is what happened in May of last year and what's happening in May of this year. And the reason that we look at year over year data is because life sort of rhythms the same month over month, so or 25 over 26, okay? And so things that are happening for people in the month of May last year are the same sorts of things that are happening for people in the month of May now. So this gives us a better picture of the following the market, if you will. So residential inventory is our first category here. And I'm going to flash a couple of stats up on the screen as I talk through some of this stuff, and so you guys can follow along. In 2025, in the month of May, we had 17,000 residential houses for sale. Inventory is actually technically down. We're at 15,800 units. That's year over year for the month of May. And what that tells me is actually that I think there's just a handful of people who are sitting the month of May out right now. Spring came very early in 2026. I think spring came early because interest rates dropped significantly right after the first of the year. Interest rates were hanging out right at 6% in January. They stayed there until February, and then we went to war first week of March. And then so by the time we got there, you saw those the interest rates start to spike again. As we sit here today, we're into the third week of June. The way the data is released to me is that I don't have May's data until the second week of every month. So in the next recording session, we will analyze this month's data. So the month's data that we're able to analyze today is a full month of May, and that's your June summary. So residential inventory right now is hanging out down 7% from this time last year, which means we are absorbing a little bit of inventory maybe more quickly than we were last year. Condo inventory is technically up, 6,542 condos for sale on the market right now against 2025 condo inventory at 6,413. The days on market is actually extending, and this is interesting for me. Days on market for the single family detached home right now is 54 days. That's average days from the time the sign goes up and it goes active in the MLS to the time that it goes pending. Even in COVID, we didn't have 0 days, okay? So even when we were selling things very quickly, the lowest days on market we saw during the fever pitch market of COVID was 14. Okay, so 14 was the tightest amount of days on market we saw for things that were selling quickly. So if 14 is 0, that means like we were selling things very quickly then, basically, like almost, selling everything pretty much every weekend. Then 54 days really feels like somewhere between, 30 and 45 days on market as a sort of an average. I know that's confusing, but 0 doesn't really exist in terms of days on market. It does. You can list something today and turn it pending today, and in which case it'll show up as maybe 0 or 1 day on market. But that's very rare, and you don't see those actually happening very often. So just to sort of set the expectation on how days on market can accumulate. And then condo days on market are a little bit higher right now at 66 days. Let's see, number of sales. So this is how many closings are we having each month. And in the month of May, we are closing ahead 1% from 2025. So we are actually selling more houses than we did this time last year. And so we're on pace to close roughly 55,000 houses in 2026, and that'll be up roughly 1% right now from 2025. So we are still putting transactions together. This is the other sort of myth maybe I want to just distill, which is transactions will always happen. Transactions happen because people live, love, die, have babies, do the things that they do, and that creates a need for a real estate transaction. The question just is, how quickly are we going to do them, with how much competition, and how at what price, okay? So right now we are closing just ahead of last year, which is very good. I will say condo sales being sluggish. So condo sales at 5,274 sales year to date is behind last year by 8%, okay? And so the condo market is really sticky right now. In our next video, we'll talk about insurance and some other things to just talk about why the condo market has gotten so difficult. So if you have an attached piece of inventory, the condo market is pretty tricky right now. Average price has absolutely been hanging in. On paper, average price has only come down 1%, okay? So the average price of a single family detached home in 2025 in May was $751,309, and today the average price is $743,600. So bear with me here. Average price is down $8,000, which on $740,000 is only a 1% change roughly, okay? So prices are down 1%. It feels in the market like prices are down 10%, okay? What you're seeing is a lot of price reductions. You're seeing a lot of sellers who are having to take less than they thought they would have to take. But the statistics are showing that prices aren't softening that big, that statistically the prices are softening at roughly 1%. I think that the condo market prices have been softening year over year for the last handful of years. We peaked in 2022 for condo average price in the month of May at $499,000 for the average price of a condo, and that number is down to $464,000. So think of that. So in the last four years, average price has come down $30,000. Okay, so if you bought a condo or a townhouse in 2022, you absolutely paid top dollar for it. If you bought a single family home in 22 or 23, you absolutely paid top dollar for it. The other thing I like people to know about real estate statistics in general is that often I can see these cycles and statistics show up in 10-year increments. I know it feels like an eternity. 10 years feels like 1,000 years when you're dealing in market cycles. But it's important to remember that real estate is a long-term investment. Nobody buys real estate to make money quickly in it. It's a long-term strategy. So if you're entering the market right now and you don't plan to get out of that house or out of the market quickly, then it almost doesn't matter, what you buy and for how much money. I mean, of course it does. You want to negotiate the best price you can today, given the market conditions. But really, real estate cycles and real estate statistics don't actually reveal themselves, but in a 10-year strategy. Okay. So let's just take an example on a 10-year strategy that's easy to see. In 2007, for example, the average price of a single family detached home was $233,000. We went into a recession where average price came down 15%. That was a huge hit to average price during the recession. So from 2007 to 2011, the average price came down 15%, which is substantial. It took us until 2017, 10 years, to recover that average purchase price back to where it was at. Okay. Now that was the Great Recession. So the thing is that we can now look in 10-year cycles, and let's do that. So if I take 2016 to 2026, the average price in 2016 of a single family home was in the 500s. Today, the average price of a single family home is $760 or $740. And so the irony is that if in those 10-year cycles you look at it that way, you can see the slow and steady appreciation. Looking at 1% appreciation in a year doesn't seem like much, but you get big years and small years, or rising years and declining years, and in which case it's fine. I just like you to know that generally speaking, real estate tends to rise with the tide. Now, will we have a correction in the Denver market? Yeah, the market actually has been correcting roughly since 2024. So you've been seeing a slight price decrease. And now that inventory is higher than it has been, days on market is extending, it's taking us a little bit longer, you're actually starting to see those prices soften. One of the other drivers of the real estate market is immigration, basically. So the census looks at people who are moving in and out of Colorado. We know markets like LA County and the greater Chicago area are two of the most highly likely people to move to the Denver market. And so for 2 decades, we have seen huge net immigration from California and Chicagoland, greater Chicago area. And so what's fascinating to me is that one of the things that's been driving real estate statistics in the Denver area right now is that for the first time in my lifetime, we have a net outmigration of people. So more people leaving Colorado than we have coming in. And that's actually what's sort of hurting our housing market. So, we just have people that are leaving and they're not being replaced. I think it's fair to say that when we look at migration patterns, people are following affordability essentially, and the Denver market's become very expensive. There's really 4 pieces of data that go into housing affordability. One is the principal and interest portion of your payment. So if you're borrowing money and you have to pay the interest on that money, the higher the interest rate is, the less affordable the payment is. When the payment is less affordable, people buy on a payment. So they will offer a lesser price or buy a lesser house to be able to afford the payment, right? The other piece of information that affects a payment is, of course, insurance. So hazard insurance in Colorado has been sharply raising for a variety of reasons. I think, you look at just the entire insurance market, and what we have is these huge pools of insurers who have just gotten murdered in the last handful of years. We had, those hurricanes that hit Florida and the Carolinas. They did massive amount of destruction. We've had numerous California wildfires that have just absolutely burdened the insurance pools. And then specifically in the Denver market, we had a pretty substantial fire where 1,000 residences were burned in 2020, late 2021. And that Marshall Fire damaged a significant amount of residential houses, sort of scaring the insurance pool. And what it did is it basically just sent Colorado to the very top of the list with our peers in Florida to the most unaffordable insurance. Okay, so you got principal, interest, insurance, and taxes. Property taxes are calculated based on value. So as values have gone up, the tax calculation has gone up, and it's making the total payment for people less affordable. Last piece of information there, of course, is your homeowners association dues. So if you're in an HOA, you're having to pay those dues on top. So your total payment consists of your principal and interest, if you're borrowing money, taxes, insurance, and homeowners association dues. And with all of those being burdened right now by unaffordability, it just means that entry-level buyers, actually all buyers at all price points, are looking at their total payment and saying, my gosh, things have just gotten more expensive. This is true across the board, even for homeowners who have been in their house for a time. If you've been in your house for a long time, your taxes and insurance and HOAs no doubt have gone up. So you might have bought a house 5 years ago in a 3% mortgage in a $2,500 payment, and your payment today could be $3,500 simply because those taxes, insurance, and HOAs are not a fixed expense in your payment. And so those are some of the reasons why affordability starts to sort of get the best of us here. And those are the reasons why you start to see price come down, because ultimately what happens is we just have to afford the payment. And it's that total cumulative amount of information that gets us to payment affordability for the buyer. So my advice for sellers right now is price your house competitively, maybe even less than it appears it should be worth. So if you're in a declining market where prices are softly coming down, right? They're not coming down precipitously. They're coming down softly. But if you're entering the market in a declining market, that means your house is worth the most amount of money it's going to be worth today. And it'll be worth a little less tomorrow, and a little less in July, and a little less in August, and a little less in October. Okay, so if we're heading into a declining environment, you actually have to beat that pricing by a lot. And you have to remember, if you're using yesterday's comps to price your house, that means we have to pick a competitive price today that may actually beat the falling part of the declining market. So my advice for all sellers today is be very competitive with price. And the second part of that piece of advice actually is, if you're not priced properly, you'll know it because showings will be quiet. You won't have good activity, and in which case the market has rejected your price. I know those are hard words to hear, but you have to competitively price your house. So chase the market down hard right now if you're a really motivated seller. So if you're a motivated seller who needs to get their house sold, get it priced right. And even if that price feels like a bigger jump than you were expecting to have to make, there is a market price for every piece of real estate. And so sadly, price is really our only tool. Here's why price is our only tool. When I started in the business, we used to say that there were two reasons houses didn't sell: underexposure and overprice. We know now that there's really no such thing as underexposure with the advent of like just the way we syndicate houses. Realtor.com, Homes.com, Zillow, the MLS, social media. People can see your house if it's for sale. Now the question is it the nicest piece of inventory in the market for the money today? So price basically becomes like a hammer. Everything looks like a nail. It's the only tool we have. So unfortunately, when your agent calls and says, I think we need to change the price, and you're thinking, I was hoping that you had a different tool in your tool belt, the answer is actually, unfortunately, no. So if your seller calls and is looking for a price reduction, I'd probably tell you it's the only tool that they have. I mean, unless your house is underexposed, improperly photographed, poorly marketed, in which case you can call us. But I just want you to know that the price really is the trick right now. And so you've got to be priced right. So my advice to buyers, there is a trap in a declining market for a buyer. And the trap is, if I just wait a little while longer, I can buy it for less money. The problem is it doesn't solve your housing problems. So oftentimes buyers get caught in the loop or the trap, which is, I'm just going to wait for it to be worth less, wait for it to be worth less. And then one day you wake up and you've missed your opportunity to either buy or buy at a fair deal because you slept through the bottom, essentially. And nobody actually can tell you where the bottom of a transitioning market is. And oftentimes, if you blink, you miss it. Okay. So my advice to buyers is you have a need. You need a house. You need a place to live. It's shelter. Your primary res purchase shouldn't be so investor strategy heavy. It should be to choose your favorite house in the money in the market today. So I don't want buyers to get caught in the looking trap where they look each weekend for the next best piece of inventory and never pull the trigger, never pull the trigger, never pull the trigger. And the next thing they know, their favorite piece of inventory is gone. Interest rates dropped, which means prices start to rise quickly. And the next thing you know, you missed your window. So if you're a buyer and you have a need, go ahead and buy a house and make a fair offer to a seller.